So I'm sitting down with Ted, he's still here, but we also have Shelley Segal in the studio. It's interesting calling it a studio. We haven't been in a studio for a while, and when you were first on the show, Shelley, we didn't have a studio and we were in your house recording an interview.
Yeah, we're just chilling on the couch.
Good old days.
Yeah, it's nice to see you in the studio.
Yeah, so if people don't know who you are, you're basically a singer-songwriter, and the reason that we had you on the show 2 years ago, I think it was, nearly 2 years ago, you just released an album called An Atheist Album.
Yeah.
And now you're teaming up with Ted and a couple of other people to do a graphic novel.
We've gone and written a thing. It's going to be good.
What is it?
So I've written this comic book with Shelley and a couple of other people. It's called Balaclava Junction. And it's kind of a comic book documentary about true stories of people who grew up in Balaclava in Caulfield North and Melbourne, which is sort of the epicenter of the Jewish community. A lot of it came from growing up with the contradictions of being Jewish but not religious, realizing that religion doesn't kind of work out for me, and obviously Shelley was an interesting person to go to about that.
Who else is involved?
So, first chapter is me, which is essentially a meta story writing about why I wanted to write the thing. And I can probably talk more about that later, though it's not nearly as interesting as writing about Shelley, because Shelley, I knew from meeting with the Atheist Convention a couple of years ago, had a great story coming from the same place that I did, which was the Jewish community in Balaclava and Caulfield North, and the Jewish schools and the synagogues, etc., etc., and in a very public way come out and done her thing. The next person we've written about is a guy called Rafael Aron, and he will seem, certainly to this audience, like a contradiction. He is the director of Cult Consulting Australia, which is an organisation basically stages or assists in interventions to do with people who've fallen under the thrall of gurus or become involved in cults. So he is an exit counsellor, which you can wiki that. Exit counselling is a model in which to extricate people from cults. He's the author of a bunch of books called Cults, Too Good to Be True, and Cults, Terror and Mind Control, as well as books about drugs and other interesting social problems. He's also an Orthodox Jew, and he's very religious, and that may seem like a contradiction to our audience. And I've read some of his books, and he writes about alternative medicine cults and psychics and a lot of things that skeptics find very captivating. The book doesn't really go into that contradiction. I'm not really interested in that from that point of view, because religious people do all sorts of things, but it may be interesting to this audience. And he's certainly a charismatic person. We do have a fourth chapter, and there's a number of possibilities as to what that's going to be. I don't want to say yet because I want to be very secretive.
Keep it a secret?
Yeah. It'll be different. It might be about a lot of people. It might be an experiment. It might be my emotional turmoil, written in blood.
I think what's cool about the project is it's more a focus on the place. And when you were explaining to me, at the beginning, what you wanted to get across with the book, it's a documentary of this place, and people kind of like anti-tourism. It's this place that you just drive by and not think is anything really special and important, but at the same time, it's this place that's really shaped the lives of the community that's been there. And what I like about it kind of is it's not just like we share a worldview. We're both atheists. We've met through the atheist movement, but it's not just about us and our experience. It's about the context that shaped our experiences, that led to our experiences, and not all the conclusions of all the participants are the same. And whether or not we share a worldview with Rafael, it's about the context from which we've all come. So I like that, and it's not just everybody's the same.
Well, yeah, I mean, I decided I wanted to do this in part because I've been working for film companies where you sit around waiting for gatekeepers to eventually come back to you 3 months later and say no. But I wanted to do something, obviously, just a DIY ethos, get it done. And then if someone wants to publish it after it's done, they can do it, but I wanted to do it. The other thing was I was traveling. I did my first sort of tourism thing, and you go and you do a place and you think, okay, now I've seen something and now I know about it. Actually, you learn stuff about places from going in the back ends and the corners and the things you don't expect. So I did kind of picture it as backwards tourism. The other thing is that as looking at all these stories and some of the people who I've talked to but aren't major stories in the text is that our lives kind of share common themes, even if you're outside the Jewish community. If you're connected by a physical location and you're exposed to the same surroundings, certain ideas kind of recur in a weird and motifs occur in your lives.
So, Shelley, what's your story particularly about? So it's about growing up in this Jewish community, but then also realizing that you don't share that perhaps belief system that everybody else does?
Yeah, I guess my story in the story is kind of my journey from being a believing Jew to being an atheist. And it kind of documents, like, we went through my life story. We had a day with a whiteboard, and we kind of picked out the kind of milestones and the points where things really changed, and what led me to become an atheist, and then what led me to secular activism and the conflicts with my family, and kind of placed it in the locations of Balaclava and North Caulfield as well, and then culminating with my music, which is the musical expression of my, I guess, atheist journey.
The other thing with writing Shelley's story was I was very conscious of making not just not an atheist polemic very specifically, but becoming an atheist story. I wanted to write it from the point of view of there are probably people out there who think that atheists are, they'll say godless as a pejorative, and that is not cool to me. It's unacceptable, and I wanted to to create empathy with Shelley, the character, all the way through becoming this person who was in no pejorative way an atheist, godless.
And like you were saying, some people think, oh, you're just being rebellious. But there was no point where I ever wanted to rebel. Yeah. It was like I kind of was forced to face the contradictions that I was experiencing and the dissonance in my own mind. It wasn't really a choice.
That's something that young people get when they have strong opinions. They're rebellious or they're abrasive, but it's not fair.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty important story or perspective to highlight, I think. Because, yeah, as you say, a lot of young people who might be, I guess, the instinctive word to go with is rebel, but maybe a better one would be to say that their resist has a bit of a violent connotation. But just, I don't know, not sharing a belief or sort of trying to... get out from some sort of system that they don't feel a part of. Yeah, the temptation is to label that as rebellious behaviour, but that's definitely not the case. People, a lot of young people who are trying to get out of that sort of thing are not seeing it as like some sort of insidious thing. They're just saying this is what I believe, and this is how I want to express it.
It's really interesting from a skeptic's point of view, looking at a community like the Jewish community in North Caulfield, and you see there's a group of people who, you're raised with, all the families in your street and your neighbourhood, and you live in this very insular community, and you go to the same schools, and your ideas are never really challenged. So you have no reason to challenge them because your teachers and your parents friends in this whole community are kind of validating this narrative that you've been given. And I think it's interesting to look at communities like that and question, well, how do we get critical thinking to those children? How do we get them to learn critical thinking skills, and how do we get them to question, whether they end up disagreeing or not? How do we at least give them the skills to question so that their lifestyles can be a choice rather than something that's forced on them, rather than an indoctrination?
I think every community in any sense, whether it's an online community or a community defined by a place or by ideas or an institution, is unique and has its own secret stories and has its own sort of history. But where we came from, it might be hard for people to understand. I know this isn't unusual, and there's different examples and there's similarities in other places, but Balaclava, Caulfield North, is literally branded with religious imagery on the streets everywhere you go, and that it does things to a person. I'm not saying that it's good or it's bad or anything like that, but it does frame your thinking in a certain way. I don't think I would be as interested in religion if I wasn't exposed to it from such an early age. I think I would be able to shrug it off much easier if I hadn't seen it, if I hadn't been taught, And I only went to a Jewish school for a certain amount of time, but I'd remember being interested in the stories, but at the same time going, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel right. Yeah.
So do you think being exposed to religion in quite a strong way all throughout your life sort of makes you feel, it doesn't necessarily make you, like it can make you positive or negative towards it, but it's going to make you feel something. Like I think a lot of people in Australia tend not to grow up with a strong religious background. I know I didn't really. My parents weren't religious at all. We had RE at primary school, but that was pretty benign, and for some reason that didn't really make much of an impact on me. I don't know, maybe it says something about the efficacy of RE. But yeah, I think a lot of people that grow up religious end up having quite strong views on it one way or another.
Especially if you grow up with Judaism, because there's a political component and there's a trauma component, and there's a well, there is. No,
I mean, it's such a big part of your identity, and it's really, that's fed into you, and it's an ancestry, it's a heritage, it's a culture, it's an identity, it's an ethnicity.
Even if you're not religious, which is the irony of the thing. I'm pretty lucky, but I always knew I went to a religious school. And I always knew that I was different and that I wasn't religious, and already there was a contradiction. And I know, Shelley, you were surprised when your parents didn't want to keep kosher, when you had you were taught to value your religion in a way, but they didn't want to follow
I tried
the
to
rules.
kind of become more religious.
Yeah.
We were kind of, traditional, almost liberal Jews, and then I learnt more about it and wanted to get more involved and was surprised when...
They resisted.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know... for some reason that you're supposed to have certain political beliefs. A Jewish person won't be asked, do you have an opinion on Middle East politics? They'll be asked, what is your opinion? Whereas there are plenty of political conflicts in the world that I don't have an opinion on.
I think that's also something that, is interesting from a being, skeptical perspective. Like, part of... I feel our indoctrination as kids, aside from, valuing Judaism and Judaism being part of your identity, was a perspective, like you're saying, on Israel. And Israel is your land, it's your homeland. I was part of a Jewish youth group called Habonim, where it was a Zionist socialist youth group where I learnt about Israel and taught other Jewish children about Israel. And it's fascinating that so many of... my friends who grew up in this relatively privileged, existence. We live in Australia. We don't have conflicts. There's a certain wealth and there's a certain comfortableness that a good opportunity for education and employment, all these things, and yet we were so fascinated with a conflict on the other side of the world that has nothing to do with us, to the extent that many of my friends that I was at this youth movement with actually have moved to Israel and now are in the Israeli army and fighting for this battle. They're so convinced by this narrative that it's part of our heritage that they have been moved enough to go to a Middle Eastern war zone and fight.
And to be clear, that's not about taking sides. It's just that it seems strange that we are raised to be so invested in any one conflict. It's not about it's about having a predisposition before you can understand the politics. It's about being 8 and having some very severe political views. And
since I've tried to be skeptical about the narrative that I've been given about Israel, I find that comes in the Jewish community with more opposition than even my atheism. Like when I talk about my atheism, people are, okay, that's fine, there's another argument there, like, whether you're still Jewish or not. But I find that criticising Israel is met with more opposition than just criticising Judaism as a religion.
Because that seems to be a major distinction between, I guess, the various forms of Christianity. I guess you can't say that Judaism is just one thing. It's like Christianity. It has a lot of different aspects and different branches. But I think a main difference between Christianity and Judaism is that Judaism does have this other sort of, I guess, historical and cultural aspect more than Christianity.
It's strange. And anti-Semitism is quite different from other prejudices against people because it's a paranoid kind. Where you assume there's a conspiracy. If you don't like another group, it's usually because they're taking your jobs or they're stupid or they're incompetent. Whereas a lot of people don't like Jews because they think that they're trying to they're behind the curtains taking over the world, which is they were behind 9/11.
Here's a question that has maybe not to do with our comic, but what do you think? Do you think there are parallels and differences between, like, say, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia? If you're criticizing Judaism or Islam, sometimes your criticism can be dismissed by, accusation of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. So saying you're not attacking the ideas, you're attacking the people, and you hate the people. So it can be used in that dismissive way, or can be dismissed in that way.
Well, I think you need to be very clear about religious texts versus religion, how it's expressed through different groups of people. Because every single religious text in the world, you can find offensive things in it. And no one can realistically deny that. But religion expresses itself in different ways. And what I would usually call humanism expressed through religion is what a lot of people think of as religion. So anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, no one should hate Muslims or Jews, but there's things offensive in all of those religious texts, and picking on those texts is fair game as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think it's an open sort of dialogue about how, especially I guess in the atheist community, about how to have some sort of criticism against ideas that people have versus criticism of the people themselves. So you might get a lot of people that may implicitly believe something that their religion tells them, but not act on it or like seriously consider what they're believing. And I guess there's probably some subsection of the atheist community that is just going to go after them no matter what. But then there's another subsection that would just be like, well, we should probably just focus on the ideas themselves rather than the people. And I think that has been a prominent criticism of quote-unquote new atheism or modern atheism, where that some people are just going after a group for what feels like unjustified reasons.
I don't think they are. I think it sounds like they are.
I think
some people are,
yeah.
But I think with any group you're going to have that.
Everyone
anyway.
thinks
because
Sam
racism
Harris,
and hatred and us and them kind of mentality is going to be part of any community. It's going to be a minority, and hopefully among a group that consider themselves skeptical, it's an even smaller minority, but it still exists.
But I think, I can imagine the atheist in the corner who's never met a religious person and assumes that every religious person is Pat Robertson, and they don't understand that religious people are nuanced and they come in different forms, and they probably don't believe everything it says in their book, or they're not aware of it, or they explain it away, or they focus on the good bits, and that's just the way it is. Everyone thinks that Sam Harris hates Muslims, and he gets misquoted and taken out of context and just brutalized in other media. But if you read him carefully, it's just not the case. I would submit. I was imagining, and I was just talking to Shelley about this when I was writing her story, I was imagining what would a religious person reading her story take from it, and I wanted them to be able to understand, okay, I may never arrive at that same conclusion, but I understand why you got there, and I don't want to demonize you. So
this graphic anthology is being funded through crowdfunding, which is, I was going to say a trendy thing to do, but that sounds a bit derisive. But it's a legitimate way that people are publishing things. And so you wanted to go that independent route. And
Are you calling me amateur, Jack?
No, I'm not. No, a lot of that's actually a very interesting point, because a lot of non-amateur things have been crowdfunded recently, like major films, and like significantly really quite famous and prominent people have done crowdfunding.
I am so excited for Veronica Mars.
Yeah.
Veronica Mars is going to be the greatest thing in the world. And if anyone disagrees with me,
tell them to watch Veronica Mars, probably.
Yeah, okay.
To be honest, I've never watched it, so I can't really comment. But I've heard good things.
Yeah.
So that campaign is launching probably today, if you're listening to it
as
when
this
the episode
podcast goes
out.
up. So this is what you have to do right now, listeners. You need to go to www.facebook.com/Balaclava Junction. And you can find us on Twitter at Balaclava Junct, BALACLAVA, Junct, JUNCT. And the Indiegogo page, you can search for Balaclava Junction. And you will find us there. And for $5 you can order a digital copy of the text. And as you go up, you can get lots of awesome prizes and rewards. And there's even a Lost Tales book. There's going to be a few little short stories from Balaclava that are about maybe some lesser-known people, some stranger people, some some cartoony friends of mine. Just whatever's interesting and ironic, that may be things that would be forgotten, but they're not, because I wrote them down at the expense of other people. So you should look into that. You can also help by telling all your friends, because your friends need me in their lives. They need us. They need myself and Shelley and Tuffy and the rest of this community. And if they don't have us, they'll have this terrible, terrible emptiness in their hearts.
It's a good threat. I think
Balaclava Junction shaped hole.
Yes.
It's a big hole.
Balaclava Junction's actually a place, corner of Hawthorne and Balaclava Roads. It's the only surviving Grand Union in the Southern Hemisphere, which means that all trams can go anywhere from anyway. So it's like a metaphor for something. Okay. But it's also a place where the first story starts, and it's a place where I spent a lot of time writing this. And there's a coffee shop there, and those guys know who they are. And
hopefully they're listening.
I'm going to get a giant latte tomorrow. Anyway.
I'm sure all our listeners will check out the fundraising, the crowdfunding page, chip in some stuff. It sounds like a great project. I've seen a little bit from it. It's very exciting, and we'll have all those links up on the blog, up on the blog post for this episode. And Shelley, you've been doing lots of music stuff. Last time you were on the podcast talking about your album that was 2 years ago. Obviously, you've been doing more music stuff. So you've got a new album that's come out.
Yeah. Well, since we spoke, I've released an atheist album in the UK and in America, and I've been touring extensively and speaking at various skeptics, atheists, and secular conferences, a lot in the US, and learning more about the movement over there, which has been really fascinating. Then this year I released a new record. It's a collaborative album with a guitarist from the US. Adam Levy is his name. He's played guitar for Nora Jones and Tracy Chapman and Ani DeFranco.
When I found out that he played for Ani DeFranco, I went mental.
Yeah, you went mental. I went pretty mental when he told me.
Because I've just been listening to all of her albums like non-stop. There's a certain holiness there.
Yeah, she's easily my favourite artist. She's a really incredible songwriter that puts her politics into music, so it's a really big inspiration to me. So we wrote an album together, Adam and I, and it's called Little March. And the title track, Little March, is actually about a Romanian festival called the Marțișor, which translates directly into Little March, and it's about the beginning of spring, and it's this kind of ritual where everybody's giving each other these little brooches, and it has all this symbolism. And it was interesting to me because I was brought up in this Jewish community where ritual and shared experience is a really big part of our culture, and it's a really big part of my upbringing. It's always been something that's very moving to me. Like, even my introduction to music and religion were kind of combined. It was performing in my father's Jewish wedding band at functions, bar mitzvahs and weddings. So you're kind of mixing music and religion and customs and rituals into this kind of transcendent, transformative experience. And so I wrote the song about this Romanian ritual, but it's kind of a discussion on ritual in a broader way. And I think probably because of my upbringing and this connection that I have to that kind of shared experience, I'm not so willing to dismiss it straight away. I think it can't be done just for repetition's sake. If it's done in this way, we do this together because this is what our fathers done and our mothers did and them before them and before them, for the sake of it in a non-skeptical way, then I think that has a capacity to be really harmful. But if we utilise this obvious capacity that we have for transcendent, transforming shared experiences, we can use them for something really positive and something really good. Even if it's going to book club or going to a gig, or doing a podcast every week, it's ritualised and it can connect us to the past. It can help us with a sense of meaning. It can help us with a direction for the future. And I've been experiencing that in the US with my shows that I'm doing. I'm hanging out with groups who are politically active and engaged, and they meet every week, and they have this same kind of ritualized experience. So that song's kind of interesting from that perspective.
So you've got your guitar in the studio. What song are you going to be performing for us?
After that intro, I should probably play Little Much, but I'm not. I'm gonna I'm gonna play a song called My Morality, which isn't recorded anyway yet, but hopefully will be on my next album. And this came out of a discussion that I have quite often with people who, you know, maybe don't understand an atheistic or naturalistic worldview, and they say, how do you know how to be a good person without God? And how do you know the difference between right and wrong? How can you be moral without an absolute guide to tell you? So this is my answer to that, and it's called My Morality. My morality has nothing to do with the Bible or the verses of the Quran. My morality won't judge you by your spirituality, but by the things that you have done. My morality is not set into stone tablets who don't even tell you not to hurt children. My morality is not dictated by a deity. It's developed from empathy, dependence, and love. My morality accepts everybody's sexuality, is more concerned with inequality than validations from above. My morality is not set into stone tablets who don't even tell you that it's worthwhile to be good for being good's own sake, that not to think for yourself can be deadly mistake. My morality is not recitable from memory. It's something inside of me, how I wanna be, treat others how I want them to treat me. Basically not to hurt anybody, oppose any brutality. It stems from our common humanity, and it's what my mother taught to me, and it's mine because I'm free.
That was great. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thanks for having me.